Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Izuku was a transfer student in Class 1A with 16 quirks, Part 1. So before we start, please go check out the author of this fanfic, TheGreatMightyPoo, link is in the description. Also subscribe to our channel, and like this video. So let's begin the video. Izuku Midoriya and Ochako Uraraka were in Classroom 1A one afternoon, waiting for their hero training class with all might to begin. Yesterday's battle simulation had been an absolute disaster. Izuku had broken 3 of his limbs fighting Katsuki Bakugo, and Ochako had used her gravity control too much, and hurled in the side of her supposed enemy, Tenya Ida. Suddenly, Ochako glanced up from her notes to look out the door. "Who's that?" she asked. "There's a kid out there talking with all might." Mina Ashido followed Uraraka's gaze. "Oh, he's cute," she exclaimed happily. "Is he coming into our class? Please say yes, please say yes. He does look très chic, and very young too, but that does not necessarily mean he is a student." "No," countered Yuga Aoyama. "For all we know, he is a teacher, or even a separate member of the faculty." "Ribbit, but he's wearing a student uniform," and Tsuyu Ajiri shot back. "The teachers wear their hero outfits to class, and they can even choose which ones they wear. Why would a teacher choose to wear something that their pupils are all wearing, knowing that they could be wearing the uniform that they use for hero work?" "Good point," Yuga sighed. "Observant, as always, Manami. But then, who is he?" Fortunately, All Might spared the class any more suspense by opening the door and ushering the boy in. "Good news, class," he exclaimed. "Number 1, I am here. Number 2, we have a new transfer student today. Please welcome Jackson Sakizato." The kid brushed a swath of brown hair out of his eyes. He looked as though he was about to have a headache, and a big one. "Hi guys," he murmured. "I'm Jackson." "Tell us a little about yourself," exclaimed Hanta Sarah. "Oh yes, please do," added Ashido, her already pink face turning even pinker. Jackson smiled. "Well, I just moved here from Minato a few days ago. I got to my house during the time slot of the practical exams, so I wasn't able to participate." "What's your quirk?" This, surprisingly, was Kaken. Jackson nodded at Kaken. "I have a number of abilities," he answered. The class went silent. Denki Kaminari was the first to speak. "Multiple quirks? How is that possible?" Jackson shook his head. "You're thinking in the wrong direction. My technical quirk is called TC, or Total Ability Copy, and it gives me the ability to copy others' quirks. However, I don't always have someone with a useful quirk at my disposal, so I bring these with me." He produced a statue that looked like some kind of green knight. "I touched the bottom of this statue, and he touched the bottom with one finger. Instantly, he transformed. He was now around 6'4", and had 2 curved swords at his sides, as well as his hair having changed to a platinum blonde. Voila!" The students gasped. Sue cocked her head. "Ribbit, what abilities can you use with those?" "Currently, I believe there are 16 or 17. They vary. Some are elemental, others are melee attacks, others change my actual form." "Is it physically possible to use more than one at a time?" Kaken was on a roll today. "With enough training, I will indeed be able to combine my attacks. However, if I do it right now, I will suffer an attack similar to a stroke, but entirely in my brain. As a result, I can only use one at a time. That's alright, because I usually only need one to do a job. However, there is one other side effect." He turned back into his normal form. "When I use one of these statues, I become a totally different person, with a completely different personality. When one of my personas isn't in use, it uses my brain as a host. Having 17 people inside me takes a big toll on my mind, and I get migraines a lot. So if I hold my head when I'm near you, it's not because you're boring, it's because I'm in pain." Ashido almost fainted. "He's adorable, and his quirk is amazing. I like him already," she whispered to Yuga. Well, you will have to decide which you like pretty soon, because the other girls are beginning to see him the way you do, if I am seeing them right." Yuga really didn't appear to be seeing the other girls right. Ochako was listening attentively, but didn't look love-struck, at least not as much as Ashido. Momo Yaoyorozu wasn't even listening. Tsu looked completely deadpan, as ever, and Toru was, well, invisible. Kyoko Jiro was the only girl who looked mildly interested in Jackson's looks, but that was only visible through a slight smirk. Minoru Mineta, who was silent until now, spoke up. "What happens to your mind when you copy someone else's quirk?" "Good question." Jackson nodded. "Usually, nothing happens. However, when I copy someone with an ability similar to one of mine, such as..." He looked around. "Who among you has elemental quirks, like fire, ice, water, or electricity?" Kaken, Todoroki, and Kaminari raised their hands. Jackson nodded at Kaken. "You, the blonde. What's your quirk? Something to do with fire?" Explosions. "Perfect." Jackson turned back to the class. "Say I were to copy him, I would turn into my fire personality, since his quirk involves fire. However, my moveset will be more of a mix between mine and his. All Might stepped in. Alright, that's enough grilling for one day. We need to get to our lesson. Today, we'll be doing it. He pulled a card out of his pocket. Rescue training. He motioned to Jackson. While I explain, you can take a seat. Next to Midoriya. I believe there's an empty one. Unless that's Toru's seat. I'm wearing a uniform. Toru whined, halfway across the room from the empty seat. You should be able to see me. All Might laughed. We all make mistakes. Now have a seat. Jackson obeyed, sitting next to Izuku. The boy had one hand on his head, as he'd explained, but he was staring intently at All Might, listening to the instructions. Alright, here's what's going down today. You will be taken by bus to an off-campus facility. Unfortunately, I will be unable to join you there in person, as I have a lot of paperwork I need to fill out because of our new hero in training. Mr. Aizawa will be taking my place, but I'll make sure he's not too much of a how did you word it, Ms. Ajui? Buzzkill. Sue twirled her finger by her head. Ah yes, anyways, in this facility you will be trained on how to handle rescue missions in a large number of disasters, such as windstorms, landslides, wildfires, shipwrecks, and more. Jackson raised his hand. Quick question, he said weakly. Shouldn't the missions involve combat too? Why do you say that? Asked All Might. Well, one of the situations you named was a shipwreck. Don't villains cause a lot of those? Landslides and fires too, depending on their quirks. It would make a lot more sense, and train us a lot more thoroughly if we had to take out mock villains in some of these trials, as well. Not all of them, but the ones that could be man-made. All Might was speechless for a second. Finally he gathered his wits. That's an excellent point. I suppose, ideally, that is how it should be done. However, to create mock villains for the exercise would cost much more money and resources. Then another idea is split the students up, like you did with the battles. Put teams of 2 hero students against 1 villain. The ultimate goal will be either to take out the opposing side, or for the heroes, to rescue every target. The heroes will try to rescue as many people as possible, while the villain will try to stop them, as well as to capture them. The entire class was staring at Jackson at this point. This time, Ashido really did faint. All Might cleared his throat, and stared in wonder. You seem to know a lot about these sorts of exercises, he exclaimed. Well, no, but my dad was a pro hero for a long time. He wasn't famous, but he was pretty successful. He taught me everything he knew. Well then, I will take your advice into account. All Might's grin widened. To the buses. The class got up, and began to file toward the door. Ochako and Izuku stayed behind, mainly to wake up the still unconscious Ashido, but also to talk to Jackson. Well, like All Might said, welcome to the UA, Izuku exclaimed, while Ochako tried to wake Ashido up. Thanks. Jackson got up, and walked over to Ashido. I think I know how to do this, he murmured. He pulled another statue out of his pocket. This one looked like a set of pointed blue diamonds. He touched the bottom of the statue, and his skin and hair turned blue. He took a deep breath, and blew a cloud of frost in Ashido's direction. She shivered, and woke up. Ochako? What? She saw Jackson, or Chill, as this form was known, and almost passed out again. Hey, don't conk out on me again, Ochako exclaimed. We're getting on the buses for rescue training. Alright. Ashido got up, a bit wobbly. She glanced at Chill, and blushed. Thanks, she said, almost breathless, both from the cold, and from the fact that the cutest guy she'd ever seen had just indirectly given her CPR. She smiled, murmured something under her breath, and walked to the door, running into the side of the doorway on her way out. Chill glanced at Ochako. She always likes that, he murmured, his voice considerably lower than normal. No, usually, she's really enthusiastic and bubbly. I don't know what's gotten into her. In reality, she knew, and it was pretty obvious what had gotten into Ashido, but for Jackson's sake, she wouldn't say it yet. She grinned at him. See you on the bus, she exclaimed, bouncing away. She's one to talk. Chill chuckled to himself, then turned to Izuku, and switched back to his base form. Izuku smiled warmly. That's a pretty insane quirk you've got there. It's not that awesome. What's yours? Jackson asked. Well, Izuku tried to think of an explanation that didn't give away the secret of One for All. I can increase my physical strength for a couple seconds at a time, but if I attack or do pretty much anything during that time, I'm basically out of commission. Oh yeah? I watched some of the practical exam tapes. You're the guy who took out the big baddie, right? Shattered a few of your bones in the process? Well, if that's how you want to remember me, then sure. My name's Izuku Midoriya. Nice to meet you, Midoriya, Jackson answered. We should get going, huh? The two walked out of the classroom, and rejoined their classmates at the bus terminal, where Ito was yelling out orders about how to board the buses. He seemed to be doing fine, until Koji Koda noticed Ida? The B buses have open floor plans. Ida stood stock still for a moment, then sighed, and boarded his bus without another word. Izuku sat between Ajui and Ochako. Jackson was in the back left window seat. He looked out the window at the passing scenery, trying not to get carsick. He didn't notice that Sue was trying to get his attention until she gave him a whap with her 20-meter tongue. Ribbit, Jackson, are you okay? She looked worried, which was unusual, because it was very rare for her to betray any sort of emotion. Your face is green, your hair is green, and I don't see anyone else complaining, Jackson murmured. He shook his head. Sorry, I'm just getting one of my signature migraines. Comes with a lot of things. Bus rides are one of them. Sue grinned. That's fine. Most of us get headaches pretty often too. She glanced around, as if trying to get someone to respond. Kaminari picked up the joke where she left off. Usually when Bakuyu over there is shooting his mouth off. What did you say, punk? Kakin yelled, sitting up instantly. Don't make me come over there. Jackson could instantly tell that this wasn't a joke. See? Like that. Man, it's already splitting. Kaminari held his head in both hands. You've got some kind of gift, Kakin, and it's a dark one. I'll crush you, twerp, Kakin snapped. Don't think I won't. You're no match for me. Yeah, if being an annoying bully was a contest, piped up Eijiro Kirishima. As the students bickered, Jackson smiled. I like you people already, he murmured, still looking out the window. Give or take, he thought. Once the students got to the facility they'd be using, they filed out of the buses and entered. Each student was wearing his or her hero uniform, except Jackson, who hadn't gotten his yet, and Midoriya, whose costume had been destroyed during the battle training. 13. The resident hero welcomed the class. Today, you learn what is, to me, the most important aspect of hero work, she exclaimed. The art of the rescue. She waved a hand toward the middle of the building. Behold, the unforeseen simulation joint, or, as I like to call it, the USJ. There were a bunch of different zones, each one holding a simulated natural disaster. Jackson was able to count 8. 13 went on. Today, you will be tasked with rescuing civilians from random points in these zones. You've been divided up based on skill. Suddenly, on the stairs, a shadowy form appeared. You do not need to split them up based on skill, it boomed. Why not make it random? A wave of shadow appeared from the figure, and the students were covered by it, and sent into darkness. When the shadow cleared, Jackson looked around. He was standing in the center of a raging fire, and there were people all around him. But these weren't civilians, and no freaking way were they friendly. These were villains, and they were after the students. Jackson reached into his pocket. If I'm gonna be in hell, then I'll play like the Hellions, he murmured, drawing out a statue of a large flame. He pressed his finger against the bottom dash, and transformed, this time taking on a whole new personality. Now he had blue skin, similar to Chill. However, his eyes were now huge and green, and he sported bracelets, and a crown with a green gem in the center. But the biggest change was his hair, which was now literally a giant flame. Let's get this party started. Leo Sakazato, reporting for some butt kicking. Jackson's new form. Leo cracked his knuckles, and looked around. Alright, who's first? A man who had half of an inhumanly muscular, bulky body stepped forward. I'll kill. He couldn't even finish his sentence before Leo had ignited both fists on fire, and dropped the guy with 2 flaming uppercuts. Who? Man, what was that you said you were gonna do? Oh wait, you didn't? Leo cackled. 3 more villains closed in on him, and he realized his predicament. Ah, come on. I hate 1-on-3 fights. Then let's make it 2-on-3, yelled a voice. Before Leo could process who the voice belonged to, the first villain was on the ground, and a second was contained in a long, pink rope. No, not a rope. Hey, frog girl, exclaimed Leo. So glad you could make it. I mean, two's company, but sheesh. He shot a fireball at the third villain, sending her flying. Multi-man ambushes? That's just cheap. Sue landed on the ground, and slammed her target down. As she did, she pulled her tongue back into her mouth. My name's actually Tsuyu Ajiri, but please call me Tsu. Alright, I'll make sure to remember that, doll. I mean Tsu. She blushed. Can we get back to stopping this threat now? Sure. Leo punched another villain with his flaming fist, then spun, and kicked a third. A woman used a magma quirk to send Leo flying into the air. He flipped, rode the plume of magma for a bit, then slid down it, and launched an elbow into the woman's face. But at that time, he'd let his guard down dash, and suddenly he and Tsu were surrounded by villains. With a quick count, Leo saw at least 10. The 2 stood back to back. Alright, Tsu, Leo snarked. Got any ideas? Just one, Tsu answered. She then proceeded to wrap her tongue around Leo's leg. Tsu, not on the first 8. Leo stammered, embarrassed. Getting no response, he needled. What are you doing? Use your fire punch thing, Tsu exclaimed, tightening her grip. Huh, oh wait, yeah. Leo got it all of a sudden. He ignited his fists again. Alright. Let's show these freaks the meaning of a firestorm. What do you mean, firestorm? A half-man, half-bear asked, sticking out his claws. What can you do to us with one leg tied? Leo saw it coming, but he was still startled when Tsu yanked him off his feet and began to swing him. Not knowing what else to do, he yelled, improv special move, coming right up, clock comic clocker. Tsu spun in an ever-widening circle, and with the force of her swing combined with Leo's flaming fists, whose fire eventually traveled all the way down his arms, the move was complete. Tsu stretched out her tongue, as far as it would go. The circling fireball struck most of the villains in the area. Once all but one of the villains had been defeated, Tsu let go of Leo abruptly, and the boy sailed through the air at a huge man standing about 18 meters away. Leo brought his arm back. "Here's one for the road, brought to you directly by the pyro himself," he hollered, slamming his fist into the man's face. "And by into, I mean into. EW. Disgusting," Leo commented, after realizing his fist was going through the man's head. "I'll have to talk to my doctor. Who knows what diseases this joker had." He pulled his fist out, and the man sank to the ground. Leo glanced down at him. "Oops. That did a little more than I expected." Tsu walked dizzily up to Leo. "Thanks for the help," she murmured, tottering back and forth. "Okay, your face is as green as your hair. That's not good." Leo sighed and turned Tsu around. "You wretch, make sure to do it that way." "Sorry, I'm just not used to spinning that much ribbit." "Whoa there, don't hurl on me yet. There are still villains out there, and we gotta take them down." "Come on," he sighed. "You know what, forget it, I'll just carry you." Leo lifted Tsu up in his arms and began to carry her through the rest of the fire zone. He kept one hand ignited, as well as a fireball inside his mouth, just in case any more villains showed up. But the route was clear, and he reached the eastern border with little trouble. "I think I'm okay now," Tsu exclaimed, hopping out of Leo's arms and walking over the border between the fire zone and the squall zone. She didn't look back. If she did, he'd see that her face was turning redder by the second. "Man, the girls here are weird," Leo murmured. "Hey, wait up." He ran after Tsu, but squealed in pain the moment he crossed the border. "I didn't know there was gonna be water involved," he whined, jumping back into the fire zone and fluffing up the flame in his hair. "If my fire goes out in this self, I'll die. Wait there. I'm gonna change form quickly." While she waited, Tsu thought about what had just happened. He seemed like he was gonna be one of those cool guy types who flinched at the thought of human contact. But he didn't show any reservations toward literally sweeping me off my feet, and he didn't object to me doing the same thing. I wonder, she blushed. "No, it's not possible. We've known each other for less than an hour." Leo had reverted back to his base form, Jackson, to recharge his mind a bit for the next transformation. But, as he was sent to the back of Jackson's mind, Leo had a lot of time to think. "She just wrapped her tongue around my leg like it was no big deal, and when I was carrying her, I didn't get a good look at her face. But was she blushing? I mean, I was just helping her get out of the fire, but I'm not inside her head, so. Can you do it? The rest of us are here too," Chill snapped. The Necromancer's Doom and Gloom persona was also near the back of Jackson's mind, and he wasn't too happy about how chatty Leo's mind piece was. "Sorry, just trying to piece something together." Dino, the wrestler persona, spoke up. "Chill, he's right. That girl was pretty embarrassed about being carried." "Thanks, Dino." Leo was glad to have someone on his side, though Dino was a huge softie despite his massive size, and was usually on everyone's side. Paris, the most romance-oriented and immature of the avatars of Jackson's personality, chimed in now. "I know what you're thinking, Leo, and may I just say, I'm all for it." "How could you know what I'm thinking, Umbrella Boy?" Leo exclaimed. "I don't even know what I'm thinking. Are you suggesting that she likes me?" After one battle, a combined special move, and a couple minutes of being carried for the specific reason that she was too punch-drunk to walk? You lost it a long time ago, but this is a whole other level, my dude. Paris laughed. "All the signs are there, buddy, you just can't read for crap." "Alright, that's it, I'm gonna." Jackson's main mind had had enough. "Will you all please just cut it out?" His mind went silent. He sat there, on a rock that was slightly overwhelmed. All of his other selves, even the ones that weren't talking, focused on the center of his brain at once. "I don't care what she thinks of Leo. As far as I'm concerned, nothing can come of it, and I'm ultimately the one in control, so what does it matter? I'm sick of you all losing your segments of my mind over something you can't control." Everything inside him was silent, and he realized that all of his selves were quiet out of shock. Leo, offended, retreated farther into Jackson's mind. The others tried to pretend they hadn't just heard Jackson flip his lid. Jackson pulled a statue of a big green ball of light out of his pocket, and touched the bottom. A ball of light appeared, and when it dissipated, his hair was sparking with yellow and green bolts of lightning. He wore a necklace made of what appeared to be emeralds, and his hands glowed with bright green light. "Much better," Wisp, the electric-type quirk user, murmured. "Let's do this." He ran over to Tsu, who took one look and stepped back. "Jackson, what happened to?" She cocked her head. "You changed form, didn't you?" "Wisp, at your service," answered the boy. "Whoa, so, what part of Jackson are you?" "What do you mean?" "Well, from what I've seen, each of his different selves has a certain aspect of his personality. Can you tell which one is which?" "Oh, that? Wow, you're observant. I'd be glad to explain. I'm the avatar of his friendly side, the one that focuses on friend relationships, strengthening bonds, etc. But I'm also kind of childish at times. Leo, whom you just witnessed in action, embodies Jackson's confidence, but he's a bit, how I should word this, flirtatious. Not to mention, he's got a bit of a temper on him. You also met Chill, who's Jackson's cool and collected side. The downside of that is, he's constantly depressed. Devirius, the blade user, is the form of Jackson's nobility and gallant side. Loves fair fights, only duels and equal, believes in total equality, yada yada yada. Kind of a jerk though. Yoma uses what can only be described as yo-yos. He's a bit of a hipster. The backwards cap kind, not the peace signs and drugs kind. Cap, or Capsule J Model SCP-875, is the analytic part of Jackson's mind. Takes up most of his left brain, and its power, Jet Boost, is one of the most useful of all of Jackson's forms. But it's, well, a robot. Simi is one of Jackson's less marketable traits. He represents Jackson's timidity. Put a girl in front of poor Simi, and he goes tomato red, and can't say a word. But his power, his mirror control, is incredible. You'll have to see it in action, because I can't explain it. Meanwhile, Dante is pretty much the exact opposite. He may look like an Indian in his headdress, but he's as close to a British socialite as one can get. Not to mention, he can fly and shoot weaponized feathers. Rush and Dino are all about physicality. Rush uses a lot of open-hand martial arts, and he's based on Jackson's focus and calmness under pressure. Dino is a wrestler, and he'll suplex just about anything up to 15 tons. Really impressive. Unless he's suplexing you. He's extremely compliant and difficult to tick off, and that's what he represents in Jackson. Vile, the ninja, represents actually, I'm not sure, I never talked to him. He keeps to himself a lot. Same with Baula, the petromancer, rock user, if you don't speak Latin. Finally, there's Paris. Hoo boy. His weaponized umbrella is pretty functional, seeing as it's made out of a spear and a shield. But, as a personality, he can be annoying. He's the one that focuses on romance. He memorizes people's personalities and matches them up with someone else. The thing is, 99% of the time, he's right. But that other 1% makes a difference. Also, he can dish it out when it comes to dating advice, but he can't take it. If he sees someone he likes like that, he's on them like a buzzard on a goat wagon. Sue was beyond impressed. Are there any others? Well, there's one, but we don't talk about him. Why not? Because he isn't part of Jackson's personality. He goes by a number of names, but most of us just call him either Ingvar or Thunder Monkey. He's wild. He's a complete idiot, and blind, as a bat, and doesn't know who his enemies are more often than not. His warhammers can destroy whole buildings if he isn't handled with care. Most of the time, though, he isn't the dominant self, and he isolates himself from the rest of us. Doesn't sound like the type I'd want to meet. Sue glanced around as she walked. Hey, did you see something? No. Wisp shrugged. We're surrounded by veritable walls of rain and buildings. There isn't much to see. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his neck and spun around. What the heck was that? He asked, seeing nothing and no one near him. He stepped back and rubbed his hands together, generating static to charge up his attacks. His power was amplified by the rainwater. Oops. Sorry. A voice came out of the curtain of rain. I thought you weren't who you were. I didn't recognize you. Where are you? Who are you? Sue grinned. You don't know Hagakure, huh? She has an invisible quirk. Oh, that explains it. Wisp shrugged. Hagakure? Is there anyone else here with you? Besides villains, I mean? Yeah, there should be, at least. From afar off, a form drew close, swinging from buildings by a tail. Wisp prepared a bolt arrow, holding it in one hand, and shielding Tsu and Hagakure, at least, where he thought she was, with the other. His electric hair flared up. Hagakure spoke up. No. He's okay. That's Masahiro Ojiro. He's my friend. Oh yeah? I recognize him now, Wisp answered, remembering the blonde boy from class. Ojiro landed on the ground near them. Hey guys, he murmured. There are a lot of villains around here, but I think we duped them. They should be on the other side of the zone right now. Wisp glanced around. I don't think confrontation is the best idea, he answered quickly. Tsu and Leo just fought a crowd in the fire zone, and she was in pretty rough shape afterwards. Really? She looks fine now. Ojiro looked puzzled. I was dizzy, Tsu interjected. I helped Leo with a special move that got rid of the villains, but it involved a lot of spinning. She purposely left out the carrying part. Ojiro probably wouldn't mind, but there was no sense in giving Hagakure the wrong idea. Alright, so we don't attack directly, Ojiro noted. What else can we do? I can try to pick them off with sneak attacks, exclaimed Hagakure, appearing to jump up and down. Bad idea, answered Wisp. Once they know people are disappearing or going down, their guards will all be up, and you'll lose the element of surprise. No, the best course of action is to try to get to the center of the USJ. That way, we can figure out where the rest of the groups are by looking at the zones individually. Wow, Jax, is that your name? Ojiro asked. In base form, yes. Right now, though, in my Electro-type persona, I am called Wisp. Got it, Wisp. Anyways, where'd you learn so much about this? Like I said to All Might, my dad was a professional hero. You say was. Is he still alive? Ojiro, Hagakure snapped. Be sensitive. It's alright, Wisp replied. Yes, my dad's still alive, but he's not a big part of my life anymore. The four had begun to circle the squall zone. Wisp spoke, as he walked, casting the occasional glance out of the zone. He and Mom split up a while back. He wanted me to be a fighter hero like him, and she wanted me to be a rescue hero like 13. Guess no one told either of them I could have been both. Now it's just me, Mom, and my brother Alpha. Whoa, I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry, Ojiro murmured. Nah, it's fine. That was a long time ago. Wisp smiled. I've moved on. Hey look, Sue interrupted. I see the center. Sure enough, through the curtain of rain, there was a familiar image, the fountain at the main hub of the USJ. Looks like there's a fight going on there, Hagakure commented. Yeah, wait, is that Mr. Aizawa? Asked Ojiro. The group left the squall zone for a better look. Shota Aizawa was taking down villains 2 by 2, using his capture scarf to increase his mobility. Oh, no, he's gonna get tired after a while, exclaimed Wisp. There's too many. We gotta help him. Before Tsu, Ojiro, or Hagakure could stop him, he began to rub his hands together again. Aura surrounded them, and he ran forward, as lightly and quickly as he could, the others yelling at him to stop. He punched one villain with full force, then turned and uppercut another. Hey kid, leave this to the grown-ups, a voice yelled. A man with biceps the size of car engines launched a fist into Wisp's face so hard, he flew into the air, and his persona lost control of Jackson's mind. Jackson quickly took the reins and assessed his situation. He had a plan before he reached the peak of his flight. Back on the ground, the villain who'd punched Jackson laughed. Another commented, his hair's not green anymore. You punched his quirk right out of him. Got that right. That's what I do, exclaimed Bosu Soto, the muscle mover villain. He shifted his arm muscle down to his legs and jumped after Jackson. But this wasn't Jackson anymore. Bosu soon fell back to the ground with a massive goose egg in his forehead. The other villains stepped back. One looked up. Hey, he's taking a really long time to come down, he complained. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Paris touched down on the ground, holding an umbrella in each hand. He shoved both simultaneously and twirled them. Looks like the only match I'll be making today is between you guys and the ER, he yelled. Aizawa narrowed his eyes. Is that the new kid? Thought he'd look a little older. Paris began beating down villains with his umbrellas. I can hear you, you know, he exclaimed. And Jackson himself does look older than me. Right now, I'm the dominant personality in his mind, Aizawa grunted, as he used his capture scarf to draw in 2 villains and punch their lights out. Let's talk about this later. Agreed. Working as a team, Paris and Aizawa slowly thinned out the crowd of villains, but both of them appeared to be getting tired. Paris knocked one baddie out with a well-placed umbrella swing, then opened the umbrella, sheathing the other. I think I need both weapons, he panted, pulling the top off of the umbrella. The top hardened into a shield, while the shaft now looked like a gold-tipped spear. Paris put the shield on his left wrist and held his spear in his right hand. I've got an idea, Leo put in. Were you paying attention when Sue and I were in the fire zone? Paris sighed mentally. Yes, Leo, I was. What could you have possibly gained from that? Look at Mr. Aizawa's weapon, Leo explained. That scarf looks like it could work exactly like Tsu's tongue. Huh, I see what you're getting at. Good idea. Man, Leo, you're having a really good day today. Paris laughed and dodged an oncoming strike, bringing the blunt end of his spear down on a villain's back. You're not usually this analytical. That's generally Cap's business. Well, I can be smart, too, Leo answered in mock indignance. Alright, but if this doesn't work, it was still your idea, Paris finished. He sprinted to where Mr. Aizawa was. I've gotten whoa! He dodged a tentacle swing from squid villain Sujiro Nakato, then motioned for Aizawa to come over. Alright, this better be good. I'm having to blink a lot more often, Aizawa murmured. I tried this in the fire zone. Cleared out around 15 villains. Wrap your scarf around my spear, as tightly as you can. I'll swing you in a circle. There's one problem, kid. Are you even strong enough to lift me? Aizawa asked. Dang it. Knew I was forgetting something. Paris blocked a hit from the squid. I'll need to switch to a stronger form, and do this manually. He reached into his pocket, but the squid slammed a tentacle into Person's chest and sent him flying. Nakato then picked Aizawa up, and began to squeeze him. Jackson got up dizzily. He realized he'd switched out of his umbrella form, and thought quickly about what had happened. Jax, tag me in, Dino exclaimed. Aizawa needs someone big and strong. That fits my description perfectly. Got it. Jax pulled a statue of a blue robe out of his pocket. He tapped the bottom, The squid was choking the life out of Aizawa. "Hope you don't have family," Nakato snarled, "because they're gonna." He was cut off, noticing a giant shadow looming overhead. "Hey, suckers for brains," a voice snarled. The squid turned around and looked up to get a good look at this new foe. Jackson had become the ultimate wrestler, the 6'5", 300-pound Dino the Dynamic. He stood to his full height and broadened his chest as far out as it would go. "You've got a lot of nerve, breaking into the U.A, a school full of hero trainees and hero teachers. Even though I know that much, we're not here for you, big boy," Nakato taunted, squeezing Aizawa a little harder. "And we're not here for Eraserhead either. We've got bigger goals." "Well, if you're not here for Aizawa, the best course of action would be to quick." As a flash, Dino reached out and grabbed Nakato by the neck, lifting him into the air. "Let him go," he finished. "I'll give you some breathing room if you do. If you don't," he squeezed a little harder to emphasize his point. The tentacles around the squid's head shot out and tried to dislodge Dino's grip, but the big brute was too strong. Finally, Nakato, worn out from the effort of resistance and from the battle, dropped Aizawa out of exhaustion. "All right," he wheezed. "Now put me down." "I'm a man of my word," Dino growled, dropping the villain onto his rear. But the moment he did, Nakato spat a cloud of ink at the wrestler. Nakato's breathing had been restricted for a while, and his ink shot relied on his respiration for a propellant, so the ink didn't reach Dino's eyes, but it did splatter on his robe. The two stood there, unmoving for a few seconds. Finally Dino spoke. "You ruined my Yakuza," he murmured. "Now I'm gonna ruin your face." He shot forward, grabbed Nakato by the chest, and leapt an incredible distance into the air. He twirled the squid's body a couple of times, then thrust him down with both hands just as they neared the ground. Boom! A sound like thunder filled the USJ. When the dust cleared, a giant crater graced the ground, and inside it, Dino was standing over Nakato's shattered body, ink and blood-stained robe waving dramatically. "That's what happens to people who make me have to call my dry cleaner," he growled, turning around. "Anyone else want their last ride?" No villains were left near the crater. Aizawa and Paris had finished that group off, but two stood near the fountain at the very center of the building. One appeared to have human hands pasted, palm first, all over his body. The other looked like a big, bulky man, but with an exposed brain, and a bird-like beak filled with teeth. Dino glanced at the villains. "One of you want to square up?" he asked. The one with the hands coming out of him raised an arm. "Nomu, why don't you show him that more than one person can be strong?" The birdman roared. His eyes focused on Dino. 1 second, he was there. The next he was standing right in front of Dino, glaring down at him. "Whoa there, big guy," Dino snapped. "Didn't your mother ever tell you not to run indoors?" Nomu roared again in response, and grabbed Dino by the shoulders. The big boy grabbed Mom's shoulders, as well, and the two assumed a classic wrestling stature. Except neither one could move. They stood stock still, struggling against each other's might. Dino was several inches shorter than Nomu, but he looked to be expending less energy. Tsu, Ojiro, and Hagakure watched the fight from right outside the squall zone. Tsu gulped. "It's a complete stalemate," she exclaimed. "They're equally strong, and equally balanced, if something doesn't happen soon." "No, look, that thing's way stronger," countered Ojiro. "But Jackson has better leverage. That's why they aren't going anywhere. They both have advantages, and neither one can overcome those of the other. Someone needs to go help him," Hagakure cried. "He can't win on his own." Then, Nomu did something no one expected. He lifted Dino into the air, and threw him over his back, then spun, and kicked him hard enough to send him flying. "Neither one can overcome the advantages of the other, huh?" Tsu asked. "I never said that was a definite explanation," Ojiro murmured. Dino landed on the ground face down. He sprang up, and turned to face Nomu. "Cheap move," he yelled. Nomu reacted to this by sprinting forward, and punching Dino in the face. A lucky hit. Dino's suplex jet move could have dodged it easily. But even lucky hits have consequences. Dino flew back again. This time, when he landed on the ground, he'd reverted to his base form. "Jackson!" hollered Ojiro, running to the boy's aid. Jackson sat up, shaking off the ringing in his ears. He saw, albeit out of focus, Ojiro coming toward him. Nomu walked over to him, slower than Ojiro. Aizawa fought the man with all his hands. Tsu, and probably Hagakure, is going to find help. But he didn't see Midoriya. "Leave him alone!" the green-haired boy yelled, rushing past Jackson to launch a Detroit smash into Nomu's abdomen. Seeing this gave Jackson a little more strength. He got up just as Ojiro neared him. "I'm fine," he snarled, not waiting for the question. "I'm gonna help him." "No, you need to stay back," Ojiro yelled. "You don't know what that thing can do. Without one of your other selves, it's a suicide mission." "Listen, my other forms do a lot of the grunt work when it comes to fighting, but I have a few tricks of my own," Jackson explained. "Remember my actual quirk? I'm gonna see what makes that Nomu guy so strong." And then he cracked his knuckles. "I'm gonna take it from him." "I can't stop you, Jackson," Ojiro countered, but this is really gonna be dangerous. Exactly. Jackson smiled at Ojiro, then turned and ran toward Nomu, who'd just thrown Midoriya a considerable distance. Hey, Birdbrain, I've got something for ya, he yelled. Nomu looked down at Jackson. Here was Nomu's old foe, but much, much smaller. Could this really be the boy who'd caused Nomu such trouble? Either way, now he had to die. Nomu raised a fist and barreled toward Jackson. The boy grinned and jumped over Nomu, then spun around in midair. Copy laser, he yelled. Fire! Nomu turned around just as a white beam of light enveloped him. He screamed and stumbled back, blinded. Jackson waited for the copy to manifest in his mind. Finally, he received some information. Shock absorption, huh? Not bad. He hesitated. Wait, there's something else. The words quirk overload detected appeared in his visor. Suddenly, pain like 1,000 knives filled his head. He shrieked and staggered to the side, clutching the side of his head, as though that would help. He looked out of the corner of his eye and saw a giant form coming toward him. Nomu got the last laugh, he thought, then knew no more. Nothing is defined here. There is no detail. There is only light, sound, darkness, silence. Jackson, 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 yelled Ishido. Oh no, guys, he's dead. Calm down, Oyama snapped. He's breathing. Jackson groaned and opened his eyes a bit, but shut them again almost immediately. His head was still ringing, and the bright lights around him made it hurt even more. And then what happened? He asked. Oh my gosh, you won't believe it, All Might, and the other pros came and saved us, exclaimed Ishido. Minetta's voice sounded next. You passed out fighting that Nomu guy, and All Might got you to safety before bringing down the hammer on that Birdbrain. Jackson opened his eyes again and looked around. They were still in the USJ. Some of the class was there, but he noticed no sign of Bakugo or Todoroki. Then he thought of something. Wait, who alerted the other heroes? That would be me, Ida answered. Someone just had to throw me through one of the top windows. He glared at Rikido Sato. Sato shrugged. Sugarman does what Sugarman does. Jackson grinned. Thanks, both of you. You're thanking us? Ida's eyes widened. Without you, All Might may not have even gotten here in time to save the others, let alone beat Nomu. And I've got too much of a migraine to argue right now. Actually, Sato mused, something's bothering me about that. What was that thing you used on Nomu right before you zonked? My copy visor? Jackson asked. It lets me turn my copying quirk into a laser attack. Gives me an idea of the range of my power, too. So, you were trying to copy Nomu's quirk? Ida asked. Why would that have caused you to faint? To be honest, I don't know. What happened was, my mind was overloaded for some reason. Saw it in my visor right before my migraine tripled, and I blacked out. But that usually only happens when more than one person with a quirk is hit by the laser, and my power absorbs multiple others. Jackson tried to get up, but Ishido and Sato stopped him. Are you sure Nomu was the only one being targeted by your laser? Asked Ida. Yeah, positive. It only works in my line of sight. So that means that either it malfunctioned, or what? Asked Sato. That thing must have had multiple quirks on its own. Suddenly, a new voice spoke. It does, Midoriya explained. What? Jackson turned his head. Midoriya? How do you? I listened to the guy with all the hands while All Might and Nomu were fighting. Nomu was given 2 quirks, shock absorption and regeneration. He was built to fight All Might. Whoa, Jackson thought for a moment. So, when that squid guy was talking about bigger plans, he meant All Might. You could have cut the air with a knife at that point. Finally, Ishido spoke up. We should probably get on the bus, she said quietly. With the Shape 13 and Mr. Aizawa are in, there's no way we're doing training today. The rest of the class murmured their agreement and dispersed. Jackson walked outside and pulled the phone out of his pocket. He checked the time about 4:30 and called his mom. Jax, Alondra Sakazato's voice came through the phone. The attacks all over the news. What happened? Mom, it's fine. A Warper villain came into the USJ and attacked with a bunch of thugs, but All Might and the other pros sent them packing. Oh, Jackson, I'm so glad you're okay. I assume that means you're being taught well? Jackson boarded the bus, taking a seat in the second row from the back. It's my first day, and I got to school after lunch. I wasn't taught very much. Right, my mistake. Hey Mom, school's just about over, and I was thinking, can I go visit Alf before I come home? Of course, honey. I have to head back into the office anyway, so I won't have dinner ready until about 7 o'clock. Try not to get attacked again. Okay, thanks. Jackson smiled to himself. Alpha, Jackson's brother, was in a hospital not too far from the main campus, being treated for polio. From what Jackson had heard, the wheelchair-bound little boy now had the entire faculty wrapped around his finger. Had he not been infected by his disease, Alf would have made a promising UA student with his psychokinetic abilities. As it were, though, his only opportunity to help people would come if one of the old folks began choking on their food. But it wasn't all a bed of roses. The hospital had told Alanga from the beginning that their treatments were basically just improvements on Alf's quality of life. From the looks of things, he only had a couple months left, and there wasn't much the staff could do to change that. So Jackson and his mom had gotten their morning in beforehand, because they knew the end was coming sooner rather than later. Now Jax thought about what definitely illegal actions Alf was going to take today. Order a misplaced meal from the fancy restaurant down the street, wheelchair joyride down the fire escape, flirt with as many of the nurses as he could. The most phone numbers he'd ever gotten in one day was 6. But Jackson wasn't the only one wondering about Alf. As Sue sat behind Jackson, she couldn't help but wonder, who was he talking about? They traveled on, and she became resolute. She was going to find out who Alf was, even if it involved a bit of harmless stalking. Back at the school, the students got off the bus. Jackson reached into his pocket and pulled out what appeared to be a hand mirror. He placed his hand against the surface and transformed again. Now, his ice blue eyes gazed out not from under brown hair, but from a modest orange fedora. He wore a red tunic with gold bordering. As he looked around nervously, he tipped the hat down, thinking no one noticed. He slipped off as the others were socializing. Sue watched him leave, then hopped over to Ashido and Aoyama, who were arguing about the amount of villains they'd defeated. "You guys?" Sue asked. "Where's Jackson?" "You were sitting right behind him, Sue," Ashido replied. "Why such a rush to find him?" "I'm sure he's alright," Aoyama smiled. "It's not like he's quirkless or anything." "Yeah, but he was acting really weird after he got off the bus, and then he switched to another form and left. I was just wondering if either of you saw where he went." "I'll help you tail him, if you want," Ashido said, a little too quickly. "Please," Aoyama snapped. "You'd be noticed within seconds. Leave this to a professional." "Where's the pro then?" "I don't see one," Ashido quipped. For once, Aoyama was speechless, but he recovered well. "I'm serious. Your quirk, not to mention your costume and well, you, are all extremely flashy. If Jackson left without anyone noticing, chances are he doesn't want to be followed. So, either one of us is well equipped for this." He turned to Sue. "Sorry, but you're on your own." "It's fine." Sue jumped away, leaving the two to bicker. She followed Jackson from where she'd last seen him. As he was beginning to cross an intersection, she caught up to him, but stayed hidden. Aoyama had a point. Jackson likely wouldn't take well to being followed or accompanied, so it was best if she kept a distance, and something like a building between her and him at all times. But then something odd happened. Jackson had reached the other end of the intersection when a group of girls nearby noticed him. As Sue got closer, she began to realize that the girls all looked extremely interested in Jackson. He glanced up and saw them. Without a word, he raised one hand. A beam of light flowed through him, and he disappeared. Sue blinked and shook her head. She could still see a small distortion in the air where Jackson had been. "No, wait, he's still there." Her suspicions were confirmed when the distortion moved the opposite direction of the confused gaggle of girls. She hopped to another building and kept following. Jackson's mirror form, Simi, walked nervously through the city streets toward the hospital. He'd done this before. Matter of fact, when he had to commute across town for some reason, he almost always switched to Simi and used mirrors and light to make himself nearly invisible. But a well-trained eye could still spot him, and unbeknownst to him, that was exactly what was going on. Still he walked onward, hoping that no girls nearby would see the air disfiguration and put two and two together. Finally, he reached the hospital, and Sue hopped in after him, clinging to the walls to keep hidden. Simi switched back to Jackson and brushed his clothes off. Jackson walked up to the desk and asked the receptionist, "Ma'am, can you tell me where Alpha Sakizato's room is?" So that's it, Sue thought. They're related. Should have seen that coming. The receptionist looked over her thick-rimmed glasses at Jackson. "May I ask who you are?" "His brother, Jackson. I'm just here to visit him." "Well then," the woman exclaimed, looking through her files, "I do believe I have you on record. His room is on the 4th floor, room 405. Make sure he doesn't attempt to bungee jump out the window this time, okay?" Sue memorized the number and jumped to the stairs just as Jackson entered the elevator. She hopped to the 4th floor, hiding behind an abandoned cart, while Jackson came out of the elevator. Jackson looked at the room numbers. Something seemed off about the hallway, but he didn't know what, so he ignored it. "Here we are," he murmured, stopping at room 405. He swung around the doorframe, looked his little brother dead in the eyes, and exclaimed, "Housekeeping." "Jax," Alf exclaimed, rolling his wheelchair forward. There was a cord attached to the window, and the patient was doing his best to hide it. "You didn't tell me you were coming," he exclaimed, going over to Jackson and reaching up. Jackson hugged Alf hard. "Kinda hard to make plans when you're in school getting your butt handed to you by villains." "Oh yeah? I saw the attack on the news," Alf exclaimed, pulling back. "What happened?" "Just some thugs trying to go after All Might," Jackson answered. "You know, typical UA fair." "You don't even know what typical UA fair is. You haven't been there a full day yet," Alf laughed. Sue edged closer to the door until she was standing right next to the doorway. So, how's my juvenile delinquent brother today? Jackson asked, tipping his head toward the bungee cord attached to the window frame. Alf frowned, ignoring the dig. The docs here are such dipwads. They all think I'm gonna bite it soon. I've still got lots of fight left in me. Right, that's why you're trying to jump out of a 4th-story window with a cord attached to your atrophied leg. Well, amputations cost so much. Alf grinned, then changed the subject. But other than that, I'm good. Wish I were you, mainly. Whoa, where did that come from? You're going to the best hero school in existence? You don't have polio? Alf hesitated, glancing at the door. You've got your own crazy stalker girl, and I practically have to do the stalking to get a girl. What? Listen, if you're talking about Tanya, I told her to stay in Minato. Nope. Alf looked past Jackson. Definitely not Tanya. Jackson turned slowly, following Alf's gaze until his eyes landed on Sue. The two stood there for a moment. Jackson could barely register what was going on. Adri? He asked, taking a step back. I told you to call me Tsu. Sue stepped into the doorway and glanced around. You told Leo to call you Tsu, Jackson reminded her. Alf's eyes widened. You introduced her to Leo? Dude, big mistake. It wasn't a mistake, Jackson exclaimed. Tsu, how did you follow me here? And for that matter, he closed his eyes. Why? Sue hesitated. It suddenly occurred to her that she'd never actually come up with a reason for coming to the hospital. Ribbit, I honestly don't know. It's just, when you switched to that guy in the red shirt, and then you snuck off, I have to admit, it made me more than a little curious. Well, here you are. Curiosity satisfied. Jackson smiled. And yep, this is my brother, the one I told you about in the USJ. Alf rolled his wheelchair over to Tsu, and extended a hand. Alpha Sakazato, at your service. His eyes flashed. And may I just say, if every girl at the UA looks like you, I think my big bro's set for life. Tsu blushed, shook Alf's hand, and grinned back half-heartedly. Alf, have a little dignity, for crying out loud, Jackson exclaimed, then turned to Tsu. Sorry about him. He's like that with every girl he meets. At least I can talk to them, Alf answered, instead of just freezing up. Okay, name at least one instance where I, Yumebura Mio, 4th grade. I was in elementary. That doesn't. Senjo Akira, 6th grade. How do you even know all of this? And my personal favorite Tanya Tomoka, 6 months before we moved. She was a psychopath. I was avoiding her because I thought she was gonna kill me. Alf laughed. See, I always know how to push your buttons, he exclaimed. Sue glanced at both of them. She put her finger to her lip, pondering the situation. I have a question. Where are you guys from exactly? Jackson sighed. We were both born in Minato, but our dad is American, and he and Mom got married in America. Sue's eyes widened. Wait, so you're a half? Alf nodded. Jax never tells people that because he's scared they'll treat him differently. Dude, Jackson was appalled. Get a filter. That's not something you just up and tell people. It's alright, Sue murmured. I won't tell anyone until you're ready to. She thought about Jackson's situation for a bit. Well, that settles that, Alf said, clapping his hands. Now, who wants room service? Room service? We're in a hospital, Jackson exclaimed. As I said before, the doctors and nurses all think I'm gonna bite the dust soon. So, as a result, they cater to my every whim. Watch. Alf rolled over to a tablet by his bedside and began typing. About 5 minutes later, there was a knock on the doorframe. A nurse stood there, holding a pizza box with steam coming out of the sides. You wanted this? She asked Alf. Yeah, thanks, Alf answered, grinning at the nurse. You've still got my number for Saturday, right? Yes, the nurse answered, giggling a little. I'll see you then. She whisked away down the hall, almost in a trance. Alf leaned back in his chair, blissfully aware that Jackson and Sue were staring at him in shock. I've got powers, he murmured. Alf, Jackson, and Sue ate pizza and talked some more, but soon the time came to leave. Jackson looked at his watch. Whoa, 5:30. Looks like I should get Sue back to the UA. He got up and walked over to Alf. I'll try to come visit you once a week, alright? He asked, hugging his brother. Whenever you want, Jax. Alf grinned, pulling out of the hug. He pointed at Sue and brought his girlfriend. Sue looked away, embarrassed. Jackson closed his eyes and spoke with a forced calm. Sue and I just met today. No way are we dating. Whatever. She'll make a good first friend, though. Alf laughed. See you around. Jackson nodded. Later, brother. Love you. He and Sue walked out of the room and left the hospital. They went on in silence for a while. Sue finally spoke up. So what was your dad like? Do you remember him? Yeah, Jackson grinned. He was a successful American hero. Went by the name of Multi. His quirk was similar to mine. He could create different personas inside himself, each with a different skill set. But Mom and Dad were two different styles of heroes. Mom believed that a hero's only job was to save lives. Dad, on the other hand, thought that combat was essential to a hero's daily life. All the fighting took its toll on Dad physically, but the worst was kinda yet to come. Jackson trailed off. Jackson? Are you alright? Sue asked. I'm fine. It's just I really don't feel comfortable talking about that yet. Maybe some other time. He looked down, clearly upset. If you say so. Sue glanced worriedly at Jackson, then looked up. Hey, we're here. Maybe we can get to the classroom before everyone leaves. On the main pathway, Jackson walked a bit behind Sue. Suddenly, though, he felt a presence coming up behind him at a rapid pace. Before he could do anything, a massive hand clapped down on his shoulder. He turned around and looked up into the face of, I am here, All Might exclaimed, and I finally found you. Where did you go? The hospital downtown, Jackson replied, visiting my brother. You remember Alf, right? Of course I remember him. All Might looked at Sue. Then she? Follow me. I kinda didn't want the class to know I was gone. Guess I didn't cover my tracks very well. Jackson looked over at Sue and waved her off. I'll be right there, he called. I think. Then, he turned to All Might. So you were looking for me? I wanted to talk to you about your actions today. All Might's smile was smaller than usual. What you did during the attack was very brave. However, bravery and foolishness are often sides of the same coin. You risked your own life attempting to save someone who would easily have saved himself. Jackson sighed. Mr. Aizawa was surrounded by a crowd of villains. If I or Wisp hadn't acted, slow down there, Aizawa could have handled those villains on his own. You're underestimating our teachers greatly. Come to think of it, All Might put a finger on his chin. You've been doing that since today started, haven't you? What are you talking about? When I was explaining the rules of the rescue simulation, you didn't believe the simulation was adequate training. While I admire that you're always looking to improve things, there are times when you don't need to speak your mind about it. Jackson thought back to the conversation, then realized All Might was right. Oh, I was pretty brash there, wasn't I? Don't sweat it. Really, your ideas were impressive, but that wasn't the time, the place, or the person to give them to. I see, Jackson sighed. Well, thank you for the encouragement, and for the lesson. I'll try to keep it in mind. There's one other thing. All Might pulled out a file and rifled through it for a second. 2 questions. I still have a few forms I need to fill out. 1. Do you have a parental guardian? What, like a parent? Yeah, I've got one. Specifically, a father. Your mother only gave me her contact information, and I was wondering why your father wasn't involved. Dad hasn't been on the scene for years. Jackson looked around to see if anyone was there, then continued. He lost his marbles, went crazy, and left. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, All Might said. Truly I am. That must be hard. Not really. I've gotten over it. That's something not a lot of people can say. Well, my other question is your quirk registration up to date? The costume company wants to know so they can finish your uniform. Jackson remembered his mom sending the specifications of his uniform to City Hall a while back. Yeah, they should know about my multi-man power, and my copying quirk. Good, that's all I needed. Thank you, young Jackson, and I'll see you in 2 days. And just like that, All Might was gone, sprinting to his next job. Jackson watched him go, sighed, and turned back toward the school. He walked through the halls to the 1A classroom. The moment he was inside, he was accosted by Kaminari and Mineta. Just who do you think you are, sneaking off with Sue like that? Mineta snapped. I've got half a mind to report you. Jackson stepped back. Whoa, I wasn't aware that she was even there until I got to my destination. And just where was this destination? Asked Kaminari. Because there aren't that many places to go around here. Chances are you were looking for somewhere solitary, and hoping she'd follow you. Now Jackson was irritated. That's a dollar store accusation if ever I saw one. If you must know, I was at the hospital, visiting my brother. I left alone so that none of you would notice me. Obviously it didn't work. Would you two please leave it alone now? Kaminari stepped back. Okay, but I'll be keeping an eye on you. He glared at Jackson before walking away, dragging a fuming Mineta with him. Jackson shook his head, disgusted. Some people muttered. Meanwhile, outside the classroom, Aoyama saw Ishida walking toward the 1A door, and ran up to her. There's something I've been meaning to ask you, he said calmly. This morning, when Jackson was explaining his quirk, why exactly did you faint? Ishida blushed. I was hoping you didn't see that. I don't know. It's just that I have a long list of standards for guys, and I never expected to meet anyone who met all of them. But just from looking at him, I could tell he met almost half the things on my list. Don't get me wrong, I'd like to get to know him personally before I make a decision to go any farther. But, as of right now, I think I have a crush on him. She closed her eyes, realizing what she just said. Oh my gosh. Please don't tell anyone I said that. Your secret is safe with me, mademoiselle. At that moment, Aoyama made up his mind. The situation truly pained him, as he somewhat wished he was in Jackson's position. But he cared for Ishida, as a person, and as a friend too much to let her pursue anyone he knew wasn't right for her. He would make absolutely certain that Jackson was worth the affection of Mina Ishida. Meanwhile, Jackson was gathering his supplies, and getting ready to leave. He was zipping his backpack when Hanta Siro approached him. Hey Jackson, is it? Siro asked. That's me. Who's asking? Jackson put on his backpack. I'm Ciro. I was watching you fight that bird guy from the landslide zone. That was pretty incredible. You mean my flop with the copy visor? Because the only incredible thing about that was that I survived. A surge of pain hit Jackson, and he winced. Ciro noticed. Still got those migraines, huh? No, that's not what I'm talking about. Remember how Midoriya said that Nomu was built to fight All Might? Yeah? Jackson replied, confused. That big guy you switched to the one with the robe. You know, fought that thing to a standstill. Oh, Jackson thought for a moment. Yeah, I see what you're getting at, but that wasn't really that impressive. Dino was just at a really good position in terms of leverage. He was nowhere near as strong as Nomu. Well, still, it was awesome. Ciro grinned. Not to mention, you basically saved All Might's life earlier. Okay, now I know you're nuts, Jackson exclaimed. What could I have possibly done to save All Might? Hear me out. You know how he had to leave before we went to the USJ? Something to do with the paperwork he had to fill out because you transferred here? Yeah? If you hadn't been here today, All Might would have been at the USJ right with us, right? I don't follow, Chief. He would have been fighting Nomu from the start and wouldn't have been nearly as prepared. Whoa. The thought of All Might unable to be at his best to fight something that was engineered to battle against him was almost too much for Jackson. Huh, I guess you're right. Yeah, don't let it get to your head though. Ciro grinned. So you and Sue, huh? He asked, nudging Jackson with one elbow. Jackson's face instantly went tomato red. Why is everyone assuming that today? He snapped. I wasn't. I just saw Mineta and Kaminari grilling you over there. Ciro chuckled. Don't mind them. They're kinda perverts, but overall they're good guys. Could have fooled me, Jackson muttered, glancing at Kaminari, who appeared to be having a scathing argument with Jiro. Kaminari finally threw his hands in the air and walked away. Jackson sighed and shook his head, then noticed that two of his personalities were having a conversation. So, Paris, Leo said dryly, you haven't worked your magic in a while. What do you see in those two? Paris thought for a moment. Meh, there's a spark, but it'll never go anywhere. Benedict and Beatrice's relationships seem nice on paper, but they have no evidence of working in real life. Plus, their personalities are super different from what I've seen, and he seems to be the only one interested. So, you'd give them a month? Leo asked. That's a bit generous. 3 weeks, tops, and that's if one of them doesn't cheat. You've still got it, my guy, Leo cackled. That never gets old. Jackson had heard just about enough of this. Guys, stop, he snapped. Paris's magic gets me in trouble a lot. Don't risk it again. Leo fired back instantly. That was one time, and they got over it. I was hiding out at Chada's house for a week, Jackson thought angrily. That girl's entire family was after me. Alright, calm your pecs, Paris muttered, then went quiet. So, reluctantly did Leo. Jackson's face must have changed, because Ciro looked at him quizzically, and asked, you okay there? Huh, oh yeah, I'm fine. Just technically having a conversation with myself. Ciro laughed. That's not as rare as you'd think around here. Hey, I've gotta go, but I'll see you around, okay? Sounds good. I should be heading home anyways. Jackson smiled at Ciro, and walked out of the classroom. He got to the main avenue, and walked in the direction of the train station. Leo, he thought, why did you ask about those two? Paris chimed in. It's probably because he likes Sue. It is not because I liked Sue, Leo exclaimed. I mean, not that I did in the first place. Wait, that came out wrong. Dante, the avian persona, spoke up. Love is an odd being, Leo. It scorns him who seeks it, but throws itself ever more furiously at him who denies it. Shut up, chicken wing, Leo growled, or I might just cook your poetic but to a golden brown. Paris went ballistic. Denial is the clean. Guys, Jackson yelled. I was asking a question. Why do you always get so fired up? Paris apologized and quieted down again. Dante chuckled. You didn't let me finish, he said to Jackson, then addressed Leo again. As he was saying, don't pursue a relationship with someone you just met for sure, but don't write it off just yet either. Leo took a moment to reply. Wow, that's actually really good advice. It's kind of my brand, Dante answered. You are welcome. Jackson walked the main avenue after quitting his mind. Suddenly, he ran into someone and staggered back. Oh, I'm sorry, he exclaimed. Then he took a double take, along with a triple shot of déjà vu. He thought to himself, where have I seen you before? The person in question was a short girl with long brown hair. She had bangs that totally covered her eyes. Her mouth was set in a fixed expression of timid uncertainty. Hi, sorry about that, she murmured, her voice hitching a little. Wasn't watching where I was going. Jackson smiled. It's alright. I wasn't paying attention either. He cocked his head, a realization forming. Hey, I saw you in the practicals. You're in class 1B, aren't you? But that's not where I know you from. The girl shuffled nervously. Her bangs wavered, but not once were her eyes revealed. Yeah, that's me. I'm Komori. Kinoko Komori. Jackson's eyes widened. Komori? Wait, what's your quirk? Mushrooms, Komori answered curtly. Jackson grinned and nodded, as a wave of recognition hit him. That's it, a quirk. Now I know where I've seen you before. What? She looked incredibly confused. Jackson explained. We went to the same elementary school in Minato. You were in my class. I don't remember that, Komori murmured uncomfortably. This ought to jog your memory, Jackson replied. You came up to me, and a couple of my friends in 2nd grade, and asked us if you could play capture the flag with us. You tagged me, and you had your hand on my shoulder for just a little too long, and your spores knocked me out. Now it was Komori's turn to look surprised. That was you? She asked, looking up at Jackson in shock. But you moved away, and now you know where to go. Jackson laughed, and stuck out a hand. Great to see you again, Komori. She didn't take it. You don't want to do that, she murmured. Spores, remember? Oh, right. Suddenly, a new voice hissed from a ways off. Komori, it snapped. Why are you fraternizing with someone from 1A? Oh, no, Komori murmured, looking past Jackson. That's Kamakiri. He thinks this school is nothing but competition, and he's a huge jerk. The voice got closer. We don't talk to them, remember? It asked. I don't remember saying I would do anything of the sort, replied Komori. Her tone is pure blue ice. The voice finally got a face, as it came around Jackson's front. A tall boy with long arms, big red eyes, and a green mohawk stared down at Jackson, who was surprised he hadn't noticed this guy before. But the real shocker was on the sides of the kid's face. 2 gigantic blades stuck out from his cheekbones and curved into mandibles at the ends. The boy looked like a giant praying mantis. Jackson stared up unwaveringly into Kamakiri's eyes. You're intimidating. I'll give you that, he growled. But you had best leave Komori alone. She isn't doing anything wrong. See, Kamakiri is crowded. That's exactly why we don't talk to you. All you know how to do is order people around. Surviving a villain attack doesn't make you invincible, and it certainly doesn't give you authority over us. Jackson's eyes grew dark. Almost all of his personas were geared to sick this maniac, but he restrained them. Fine, be angry at us for something we couldn't control. I can't stop you, but what I can do is ask you, as politely as I dare, please could you leave your classmates out of this? Take it up with the blue-haired guy if you want to get attacked. Kamakiri stood there, silent, for several seconds. Jackson could sense emotion coming long before he saw it. The mantis boy's wrist and the blade of his hand sharpened into an actual blade, and he brought it to Jackson's throat faster than a human can blink. Jackson, meanwhile, brought his hand to Kamakiri's skinny waist and grabbed a pivotal nerve on his hip. If he squeezed just so, Kamakiri would lose his ability to walk. The boys stood there, staring into each other's eyes for what seemed like hours, either wanting to back down. Jackson had fire, ice, electricity, swords, martial arts, illusions, flight, and a jet robot at his disposal. But he won this battle on his own. Kamakiri stepped back. You're not worth my time, he snarled. But I'm warning you, if you mess with our class. He swiped his blade through the air. You get the message. Then he slunk away, probably looking for someone else to harass. Jackson turned back to Komori, but she was looking away. I'm so sorry, she murmured, tears streaming down her face. I had no idea he'd go that far. No, don't. Jackson walked forward and put a hand on Komori's shoulder. You didn't know. It wasn't your fault. That guy's just a jerk, like you said. I'd frankly like to put his big butt through a windshield. Komori giggled through her tears. Thanks, she half whispered. I needed that. Then she turned around. I'll see you tomorrow, if Kamakiri doesn't maim you. And with that, she was gone. Jackson smiled. Nice to see her again, he thought. Most of the other personas murmured their agreement, but Paris was notably silent. That night, at the hospital, Alf got into bed from his wheelchair and turned over to face the window. He smiled as he thought about his big brother. Finally living his our dream, he thought. It sucks that I can't go to the UA, but at least Jax gets to. Suddenly, he heard tapping sounds outside his room, then a raspy female voice. He was here. My boy was just here not too long ago, the voice growled. Alf closed his eyes on instinct. This is weird. I must be hallucinating or something. The tapping came closer. Something sharp prodded lightly against the back of Alf's head. Nope, definitely not hallucinating, he thought. Pity you're asleep, the voice murmured. You'd know where he is. Oh well, it drew away from him. I'd better try something else. The school, maybe? You won't get away from me this time. Alf waited a couple seconds, then turned over. He looked at the doorway. Nothing. Suddenly, though, he noticed a card on the bedside table that definitely wasn't there before. He picked it up and squinted to read it. You didn't fool me, it read. It was signed, Oblivion. Alf gulped and slid the card under his pillow. I don't need to tell anyone about this, right? He wondered aloud. Who the actual heck is Oblivion? And who is her man? The next day in class, Jackson walked in and sat next to Midoriya. The green-haired boy grinned at Jackson. Hey, he exclaimed. I didn't see you after school. I swear, Jackson replied. If one more person makes it a joke, I'm gonna. Did someone mention your girlfriend? Ciro asked, coming up from behind and draping an arm around Jackson's shoulders. Jackson calmly, but firmly reached up and grabbed a pressure point on Zero's neck. The tape user instantly fell unconscious on Jackson's shoulder. Midoriya stared in shock. How did you? Is he going to? Yeah, he'll be fine. May even wake up before homeroom. Jackson deposited Zero in a desk, then turned back to Midoriya. I don't really take well to that sort of thing. Midoriya chuckled nervously, then had a thought. Hey, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. You said you weren't here for the practical exam, right? Yeah, that's right. I was helping my mom unpack from the move, and then we had to extract my brother Alf from the top of a roof. Before the green-haired boy could even talk, Jackson added, don't ask. So, I was wondering how you got into the school. Midoriya asked. They only had your test score to go off of. Wouldn't they have told you to wait until next year, since all of the battle areas that we use for the practicals are in use during the school year? A while ago, my dad had me go on rescues with him, Jackson replied. I didn't fight any villains or anything, but I was useful, I guess. People took tapes of the rescues and gave them to my dad, as a sort of retirement gift when he stopped being a hero to take care of Alf, and I showed the tapes to the faculty in lieu of an examination. I'd like to say it was an on-the-spot acceptance, but the prospects were really good this year. I almost ended up in 1B. He shuddered, with that creep Kamakiri. Man, he might be a praying mantis, but if that boy ever stepped into a church, he'd burst into flames. Suddenly, a voice came from outside the door. Yo, Jax, how'd you get here? Jackson turned his head quickly. He knew that voice. No freaking way. He got up and ran to the door of the classroom. Standing in the hallway was Sakiva Chada. He and Jackson had been best friends from the moment they'd started elementary school together up until the move from Minato. Chada was an orphan, but the government didn't know that, and because of how much of a help Chada was, as a hero, they didn't care. Matter of fact, Chada had a whole team of hero teens that he'd scrounge up from the streets. Most of them had either lost one or both parents, or had run away from home, and he took care of all of them. And now, apparently, he was in the UA. You made it, Bieber Bowl, Jackson exclaimed, riffing on Chada's hairstyle. Yeah, Chada answered, ruffling his own hair offendedly. Unlike your sorry but, we got here in time for the practicals. Nice to see you've still got your sharp wit, Jackson sneered, as a joke. You got those fists too? You bet. Chada threw an air punch. His quirk, boxer, allowed him to control every molecule in his hands, and forearms to punch with insane force or even set his own fists on fire. He was a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield, but not much of a rescuer. Jackson hesitated. Wait, you said we? Who else is? All of the big wheels in Redemption's Road, Chada interrupted. Golden Sparkler's here, and so are Heratic, Springload, Goomin, and Sir Hoots. He beat his chest. And Rock'em Sock'em made 6. You still have those infernal nicknames? Jackson snarked. For pity's sake, Rockin' Dawkin'? That is literally a children's toy. I was 10, and it just stuck, Chada exclaimed. Besides, we deserve pro names. We're all practically pros. None of us are formally trained, he shrugged. But we've got more experience than any one of you. Mr. Aizawa broke up the reunion. Don't you have somewhere to be? He asked. Homeroom's about to start. Ah crap, Jax, look what you did. You made me late, yelled Chada. See you when I kick your butt in the sports festival. He turned and ran down the hall. Don't count on it, Jackson fired back. He then glanced over at Mr. Aizawa. I'm drawing a blank. What is the sports festival again? The teacher sighed, as the rest of the class took their seats. I forgot you moved here from under a rock, Mr. Aizawa murmured, turning to the class. He glanced over the room. Can someone enlighten Jackson as to the specifics of the sports festival? Ida raised his hand. The festival is a series of combat-related games with the purpose of showing professional scouts the capability of our class. If I remember correctly, the games include a race, a round-robin tournament, and some sort of cavalry-based battle, although not necessarily in that order. Wait, so we're trying to get ourselves out there for the pros, is what I'm gathering, Jackson said. Alright, I get it. I'm gonna have to work really hard. He took his seat, all of his personas at attention. Mr. Aizawa nodded. Well said, Ida. Since the festival is so soon, we're going to be spending a few days training. Use all of the facilities on campus, but don't leave it unchaperoned for any reason. If anyone wants to go to the USJ to train, come talk to me. Other than that, there isn't much I can say. Good luck, don't suck. With that, he drew up the zipper on his sleeping bag and toppled over. Jackson raised an eyebrow. I guess that's that then, he murmured. The students grouped up to go to the different facilities. Jackson was about to wake Zero up when a hand landed on his shoulder. He turned around warily. Standing there was a tall boy with white and red hair, and a bored expression. Todoroki, I think his name is. Jackson flinched a bit. Hi, he squeaked. This guy looked intimidating. Can I help you? We'll see, answered Todoroki. I'm going to Battle City Beta, and I want to spar with you. Oh, Jackson smiled, but he sure as heck didn't feel like smiling. You're the only person here whose skill level I have yet to judge, growled Todoroki. Don't hold back. Then he was gone. Jackson turned back around, gathering his thoughts. Okay, I think I remember him being some sort of cold-based quirk. Leo, you're in? Hold up just a dang second, Leo replied. Endeavor's kid? Are you nuts? You might, as well, drop a bucket of water on my head. Do you realize what happens when ice melts? Jackson sighed. Rush? You think you can do it? Rush rarely spoke due to his constant meditation, but now he gave his opinion. I am powerful, yes, but extreme temperatures such as Todoroki can create an extreme distraction for me. I cannot work without the utmost focus. Using me would be unwise. Hey, Wisp shouted. I'm here too, you know. I handle temperature really well, and I've got a good range to boot. Alright, Wisp, good idea. Let's show him what you've got, Jackson thought, pulling out the statue of the green orb. He switched to Wisp, and turned to leave the classroom, unaware that the other students were staring at him. Aoyama shuddered, and leaned over to Ishido. He has more courage than I, the French boy murmured, taking on Todoroki without a second thought. Yeah, but did you see how he looked after the challenge? Asked Ishido. He was really scared. I dunno, this just seems like a bad idea. Maybe we should, I don't know. Follow him? Asked the elusive Tokoemi, walking up behind them. Both Ishido and Aoyama jumped. Ishido was the first to speak. Yeah, that's what I was gonna suggest. You think I can't read you like a book? Tokoemi prodded. What the heck is that supposed to mean? Aoyama broke up what he knew would be a heated argument. I think Ishido's idea would be best. After all, we do not know that much about Todoroki or his intentions. Ishido was dumbfounded. The son of Endeavor, in the hero course at UA, and you're saying he might be evil? Nah. I was merely saying that we could perhaps take this opportunity to see what he thinks of us, as a whole. Aoyama deftly covered up the fact that he had indeed thought that Todoroki had villain potential. Ishido glanced sidelong at Aoyama, before following Jackson out the door. Aoyama and Tokoemi followed. Midoriya, Ida, and Uraraka went to Mr. Aizawa to get a pass to the USJ. Bakugu, Koda, Kirishima, and Sato went to the woods. Jiro, Hagakure, Shoji, Tsu, and Momoyao headed for the gym, while Mineta and Kaminari decided to scheme about the 1A girls. Just as Kaminari found a secluded spot, he noticed a form standing in a dark hallway nearby. The electromancer walked closer suspiciously, but all he could see was a mass of lime green hair. Probably one of the girls from Class 1B, he thought, approaching the form. Hey, he said tentatively, are you lost or something? The form said nothing, it just quivered a bit. Kaminari continued, if you're looking for one of the training areas, you're nowhere near them, he murmured, drawing close enough to reach out, and through the figure. And that's when they came at him. Quickly, as a flash, the person had Kaminari wrapped in their hair, and the team could clearly see that this was a boy, not a girl. Kaminari had just stumbled on the hieratic, also known as Moria Jotun. The hieratic bared sharp, point-filed teeth, and glared at Kaminari maniacally. I'll see you in the sports festival, Kaminari, he growled, releasing Kaminari. Jotun then sprang up, and gripped a pipe on the ceiling with his hair, then used it to clamber away. Kaminari was left dumbstruck. How do you know my name? He called, even though Jotun was clearly gone. Weirdo. Todoroki walked slowly through one of the buildings in Battle Area Beta. He looked into every room, trying to see if Jackson would chicken out. Todoroki was just about to give up, and assumed the worst when he entered the last room in the building. Wisp was standing on the ceiling, using increased static electricity on his shoes to generate the friction to stay up there. Hey, Todoroki, he exclaimed, more confident than Jackson had been. What's up? I didn't think you were gonna show to. Todoroki was not amused. Do you want me to hang myself? Is that it? Well, that's not part of the plan. Wisp dropped down from his perch, twisted in midair, and landed on his feet. But no one's stopping you right now. Funny, notably, Todoroki did not laugh. Let's get right to the chase. Outside the room, Tokoemi, Aoyama, and Ishido watched the two face off. Ishido went pale. He's really doing it, she murmured. He's fighting Todoroki. You're acting surprised. Why? Asked Aoyama. He grinned sidelong at Ishido. It's almost like you're. Shut up. Ishido closed her eyes, and fully tensed. Tokoemi shook his head. What it is with you people, and your relentless teasing, I'll never know. But for your sake, Ishido, I should tell you that I figured out what your deal was a long time ago. You did? When? The moment you fainted during class. How many people saw that? The acid girl was indignant, though that wasn't the only reason she was so red right now. Just about everyone, replied Aoyama. Ishido groaned, and covered her face with her hands. This is worse than I thought, she murmured. Wisp rubbed his hands together, building up energy for a powerful blast, under the guise of anticipation. I gotta tell you, I think this is gonna be my best fight yet, he said, his eyes flashing. You're 1A's best fighter overall, and my power has a big advantage over yours. I think it's pretty even, don't you? That may be so, replied Todoroki, but the weapon is never half so great as the man behind it. Well said. Suddenly, Wisp let out a loud yell, and released all of his pent-up energy. Heavy voltage burst. A ball of electricity shot from Wisp's hands and directly at Todoroki. The older boy threw up his hands and barely managed to block the ball of energy with a well-timed ice blast. He was forced to take a few steps back. A dust cloud flew up from the attack. Todoroki squinted and fought to see inside the cloud. "Where are you?" he murmured. Wisp's voice responded, but not to the question. "I always wondered why people don't use their strongest attack first," he drawled, shattering the fourth wall completely. Todoroki raised one hand and cooled the room's air, freezing the dust so that it fell quickly. When it was gone, however, he didn't see Wisp anywhere. That can only mean one thing, he thought, before sidestepping an electrically charged punch from behind. Wisp stumbled forward, having missed his initial attack, and turned, delivering a solid kick to Todoroki's abdomen, which Todoroki then capitalized on to throw Wisp across the room. Wisp's hair sparked a couple of times as he made a static shield to stop himself from hitting the wall. "Crap, using too much power already?" he thought. "That must have been one heck of an HVB back there. I'd better stick to physical attacks so I can charge up again." Leo piped up. "Look out!" Todoroki slammed a fist into the wall next to Wisp's head. Wisp ducked under it and swept Todoroki's legs, but the ice that the older hero had created was still in effect, and he used it to slide away from Wisp and flip back onto his feet. Wisp began to rub his hands together again, generating more static. Todoroki raised one hand, forming an ice spear, and getting ready to hurl it through whatever blast Wisp would create. The two were at a standoff. Ashido watched the battle from outside. "This is incredible," she shouted. Tokoyami was less impressed. "Wisp is holding his own, but Todoroki has an advantage in almost every area. I can't see this ending well." "You never see anything ending well," answered Oyama. He put a hand on his hip. "I, on the other hand." Suddenly, voices broke up the ensuing argument. "Hey, you kids need to get out of here, now!" Wisp stepped forward, creating a wall of static in front of him. "Try getting past this," he taunted. But before Todoroki could move, Ashido burst into the room, followed by Tokoyami, Oyama, and Cementos. The pro hero looked over the group. "There's been another level 3 security breach," he snapped. "We all need to leave. The villain is headed right for this building." Wisp thought for a moment. "Can you describe the villain to us, just so we know who to run from?" Cementos nodded. "Her upper half is a young blonde woman with purple eyes and a thin frame. The bottom half is a gigantic spider, for lack of a better term." Wisp paled. "WW what? She's here now?" Ashido turned to Wisp. "You know the intruder?" she pressed. "Yep," Wisp sighed. "Her name is Tanya Tomoka, and she went to my junior high school in Minato." He left out a key detail, then went on. "I know how to beat her, but we'll need as much light as we can get." "Light? Go outside." "We're in broad daylight," Tokoyami pointed out. "Not sunlight. Brighter, or at least brighter from here." Something like Wisp turned to Aoyama. "You. Now hold on." Cementos interrupted the planning. "You can't honestly say that the secret to sending this villain packing is light? First of all, I know for a fact she's not a villain. Second, I went to junior high with her, and she was in most of my classes. I have a lot of her powers and weaknesses memorized." "Well, if that's the case," Cementos replied with irritated sarcasm. A crash sounded from outside in the hall. "I know you're here, copy boy," a girl's voice taunted, in a psychopathic sing-song. "I can sense you. I have ever since you left me." "Copy, that's my quirk," Jackson whispered to Cementos. "Now do you believe me?" "Don't get yourself killed," responded Cementos, but he waved an arm, signaling Jackson and Aoyama to move. Ashido came forward. "I'm coming with you," she exclaimed. "Just in case one of you gets hurt." She ran out the door after Aoyama. At this point, Cementos wasn't even going to try to stop her. Tokoyami cocked his head. "What does she mean by Jackson having left her?" "Don't ask me," the teacher replied, rubbing his head. "These relationships, these lines between heroes and villains are getting much too blurred nowadays. Makes it hard for me to tell which is which." "That sounds like foreshadowing if ever I saw it," murmured Tokoyami, taking his own crack at the fourth wall. Cementos had described Tomoka rather correctly, but what Wisp and Aoyama saw the moment they left the building still defied all logic. The girl's lower body indeed resembled a spider, as the hero had said. However, Cementos had left out that the spider looked to be made entirely of purple and black shadows, and stood on 4 spindly, needle-sharp legs. Moreover, in place of the spider's head, there were 2 huge, crazed orange eyes, and a maw resembling a canyon, if a canyon could contain the literal embodiment of darkness. The entire lower half of Tomoka's body looked to be about 6 feet tall. Then there was the girl herself. Jackson hadn't seen Tomoka in several months, since junior high had ended, but he'd assumed she'd stay the same, looks-wise. Man, was he wrong. She'd gone platinum blonde from her normal black hair, completely changed her style of clothing to match her quirk, and somehow, her eyes had turned from blue to orange. She wore a consistent blush on her cheeks, which somehow made her look even more psychotic. Wisp began to move his hand back and forth discreetly on his shirt. He'd need to charge a lot. Tanya, he murmured, staring up at the girl. It's been a while. You're looking well. You too, answered Tomoka, grinning savagely. All this effort, and her target basically went to her on a platter. This couldn't get much better. Then Ashido caught up with Wisp and Aoyama and stopped. Whoa, she muttered. Who's that? She moved a little closer to Wisp, shuddering. Tomoka saw this motion, and all four of her eyes narrowed. She glared at Wisp. You move on so fast, Jaxie, she drawled, stalking forward. You always have, if I remember correctly. There was never anything to move on from, yelled Wisp. I told you to stay in Minato for a reason. How many times do I have to tell you that? Tell me all you want. The heart wants what the heart wants, Tomoka replied, rubbing her front legs together. Now either you come with me or you all face consequences. She stormed forward, the spider mouth roaring ferally. Her legs stabbed the ground right next to Aoyama, who used his laser to dodge them. Aoyama landed on his feet, slid back a few meters, and righted himself gracefully. He sprinted forward and tried to get off a good blast, but Tomoka was simply too quick for him, moving her insective legs like a dancer. Wisp, Manami, what are you waiting for? Aoyama yelled. I need to charge, Wisp responded, rubbing his hands together. His hair flared up. Now he was at full power. Laser arsenal, now, on it, exclaimed the sparkling hero, turning back to Tomoka, who was stalking toward him, all four of her eyes focused on the thread of his laser light. He smiled at her. Man Sherry, it's been swell, but I think it's time we said adieu. He put his hands behind his head, and fired a barrage of laser blasts at Tomoka's arachnid body. The spider girl jumped, twisted, and managed to dodge all of the lasers, but one, which hit her in the leg. To everyone's surprise except for Wisp's, the leg disintegrated from the spot of impact down, turning into a pile of purple dust, which promptly blew away. Ah, snapped Tomoka, landing on her 3 good legs. I only made 4 legs for this because I thought you were going to be the gentle, timid Jaxie I always knew and loved, and that you'd come willingly. But no, you had to ruin it. You think you have me figured out, do you? She struggled to stay up. No, replied Wisp. I know I have you figured out. Your weakness, anyways. He pushed his hand out, sending a heavy voltage burst her way. The electric ball had almost hit her when she dropped in the direction of her bum leg, and rolled into a somersault. She passed under the ball, and stood up again, towering over Wisp. But now, she could see Cementos and Tokoyami coming, and she knew that other heroes would soon be here. Drat, she murmured. I've lost the element of surprise. She raised her hand, and began to disappear. You may have figured out my power, she screamed, but this isn't over. Jackson Sakazato, I will have you yet, and when I do, you're not getting away. Then she vanished completely. The last things to disappear were her eyes, still as maniacal, still as love-struck, as the moment she'd appeared. Tokoyami, Todoroki, and Cementos got to the others just as Tomoka vanished. The pro looked around. What happened? He asked. Wisp lowered his hands. She left BZZT. His entire body vibrates intensely, as a runaway electric current lances through him. Ashido jumped at the buzzing noise, despite being several meters away from the electromancer. Wisp, she exclaimed. Are you okay? Yeah, I BZZT. Just used a little too much BZZ static. I go a little BZZZT haywire when that happens, but I should be suddenly. His eyes rolled up into his head, and he began to topple backward. Ashido was at the boy's side faster than a human could blink, and lowered him gently to the ground. She fanned at his face with one hand, and at her own with the other, a gesture that only Tokoyami and Aoyama understood. The 2 guys looked at each other, and grinned, though Ashido's motions only lightened the mood a little bit. An intruder had just attacked them, after all. Todoroki and Cementos stood back, and discussed the situation. Cementos shook his head. I'm going to have to report this incident to the school board, he said. Todoroki looked away pensively. 2 level 3 breaches in 2 days? He asked. She couldn't have been connected to the ones from before. Their leader was short-sighted, but he wasn't an idiot, and returning to the crime scene would be the idiot's move. It appears she knew Jackson personally, replied Cementos. None of the villains ever referred to Jackson by name, so you're probably right. Guys, Ashido interrupted. He's not waking up. Tokoyami sighed. Have you tried slapping him? Several times, Ashido exclaimed. That's really embarrassing, you know. Slapping someone she stopped herself. Slapping your classmate across the face. Wait, Aoyama murmured. He has to build up static to attack, Then, could you perhaps revive him with the same? Ashido hesitated, looking down at her hands. I dunno. Aoyama smiled, but it was grim. Do you want him to wake up or not? Meanwhile, at the USJ, Midoriya was in his own brand of trouble. He, Uraraka, and Ida had arrived at the facility ready to train together. Once they got inside, though, a pair of talons flashed through the air, and nearly gave Deku a haircut before slamming into the front wall. Sorry, exclaimed a voice. A boy with the head, wings, and legs of an owl dropped to the ground. Out of the way, hurry, he added, running away from them hastily. Uraraka tilted her head. What was that about? She asked. Suddenly, a firework exploded above her head, nearly frying her own hair. A short, thin girl with blonde hair dropped through the smoke. Get back here, Anso, she yelled. I'm not finished with you. She shot more fireworks from her hands, using them to propel her through the air. Chada, the boxer hero, chased the other two next, but Ida stopped him. What in the name of sanity is going on? Ida asked. Two students just ran by us, and one looked like she was about to kill the other one. Yeah, figured as much, Chada replied, panting from running after his friends. Kirafurani, pyrotechnic manipulation, hot temper, I hate to lose, going all out against Anso. How do you know that much about her? Questioned Uraraka. Chada turned a world-weary smile on the float girl. She's one of mine, he answered. I live in the kid commune I run in Yokohama, Redemption's Road. Wait, you run a commune? Exclaimed Midoriya, wide-eyed. Yeah, Chada replied. And this is the first year any of our heroes have been able to attend UA. We got 6 this time around. But how? Well, the Beetle Kid, Butomu Reno, bombed the written part, or we'd have 7. No, I mean how did you get the clearance to run a commune? Ah, that's a complicated question, Chada sighed. Short answer? I have friends in high places. Ida snapped his hand to his forehead. If you run the facility, and you're here. I left another hero in charge, by the name of Jisei Henkasuru, the surface tension hero. And now, I gotta get back to practice. Chada turned, and ran after Furani and Anso. The 3 1A students looked at each other, shrugged, then went to the earthquake zone. There really wasn't a better place to practice physical combat, which all 3 specialized in. Once there, another surprise hit the 3. Uraraka saw a green blur shoot from building to building. The blur suddenly stopped short in midair, and redirected itself, hitting what appeared to be a human covered in some sort of sludge. Both students were falling toward the ground with no visible means of staying in the air. Midoriya and Ida reacted immediately, running toward the place of impact. The green blur landed a good punch and kick, then was thrown off of the good user. Both of them were shocked, though, when they were separated, and gently brought to the ground by Ida and Midoriya. Ah man, exclaimed Jotun, jumping out of Ida's arms. I almost had you. Says you, replied a feminine voice. It took Deku a second to realize the voice was coming from the pile of goo he was holding in both arms, and another second to realize that he was holding a girl in a pile of goo. The sludge melted away, and a girl with light blue hair and green eyes hopped down and charged Jotun. Another ball of goo covered her fist as she stepped into a right hook, which blatantly missed Jotun and headed straight for Ida. Uraraka jumped into the fray and touched Jotun and the girl, the latter of whom shrieking slightly as she was lifted into the air by her own force. Jotun turned to Uraraka in midair, resting his whole body in his hair. So Ochako Uraraka, Tenya Ida, and Izuku Deku Midoriya joined training then? His hair shot out and wrapped around Uraraka's waist. Deku jumped up and tried to grab her, but the hair simply pulled her farther away. The girl, meanwhile, reformed her ghost shell and struck out at Ida, who promptly spun away, crying, Don't get that on my uniform. You'd show disrespect to the company who made it, and the school that gives it by doing so. The girl hesitated. Don't want my melee attacks? Fine, she murmured, raising one hand. Have a gummy instead. A ball of goo broke off of her hand, and shot at Ida with blinding speed, splattering onto his face. Midoriya ran forward, and tried to help Ida, but the girl spun around, and targeted him. You aren't exempt from the gummy tax, either, she exclaimed, firing another ball of goo at him. It attached to his arm firmly, and he realized that it was moving on its own dash, and that it had a mouth that was about to chomp down on him. Hey, Arc, 1A guys, yelled a voice, and so dropped down from the air, and swiped at Midoriya's arm. I got you covered. Get the girl away from Jotun. That looked like it would be darn near impossible. Jotun and Uraraka were nearing the tops of the buildings. Jotun smiled down at his foes. So, Uraraka, he murmured, we're gonna be here a while. It doesn't look like you're gonna return my gravity anytime soon, and I'm not releasing you until you do. Wanna talk? He hesitated. Oh wait, sorry. He removed his hair from her face. Okay, now do you want to talk? Uraraka shook her head, and spat out a black hair. What gives? We just got here, and you're trying to kill us. I'm what gives, replied Jotun. I assume you know where we're from. The Redemption's Road heroes were having a training match and a team battle, if you will. Your friends separating me, and Shiori kind of broke the vibe. And I don't take kindly to having my vibe broken. Sounds kind of selfish, Uraraka snapped. Maybe so, Jotun said, a tendril of green hair rubbing his chin thoughtfully. But isn't it natural for someone who can't feel? What? My quirk, insomnia, basically reverses the functionality of my hair cells and my nerve cells. I can move my hair freely, but he shrugged. I can't feel my body at all. And on top of that, my affected nerves are directly connected to my right brain. Realization sank in, and it hit the girl hard. Uraraka was speechless. No emotion or expressive ability whatsoever. Jotun smiled. So I just do whatever? Try to get what enjoyment I can out of life. That's why I became a hero, because my quirk limits me. Limits every area of my life. I want to get rid of those limits. Why are you telling me this? Asked Uraraka. You barely know me. Jotun thought for a moment. Because I knew you'd listen. My fellow RR members, they've heard it all before, and they say go for it. I wanted someone to tell me I was wrong, because then I know they're listening. And you? He smirked. You let your guard down way too easily. Suddenly, his hair swung down, throwing Uraraka at Ida, who just bounded off the wall of a building to catch her. She slammed into him, quickly making them both weightless, and releasing Jotun, who dropped into a different building. He looked at Uraraka from the other side, and she glared daggers at him. You jerk, she yelled. Psycho. Why, thank you, my lady, Jotun replied, bowing noncommittally. It's an honor to have the truth told of you, more so than a compliment. And with a loud cackle, he was gone, off to find and harass Ferrani. Uraraka, are you okay? Asked Ida. I'm fine, she replied, dusting herself off. A green hair clung to her, and she swiped it away in disgust. Is he okay? I've never seen a quirk quite like his, murmured Ida. It seems to have affected every aspect of his being, that's for sure, and none of it's good. Uraraka thought about Jotun's disorder. He'd seemed normal enough, but then, so had Mineta, until she'd actually met him. What has that Chada guy gotten himself into? She thought. What do you mean, it's my fault? You started it, bomb for brains. Since the beginning of the school year, Chio Shizenji, or Recovery Girl, never thought she'd see the temper equivalent to Katsuki Bakugu. In this specific situation, she was wrong. Lacey Robinson, another American transfer in 1C, had been training in the woods surrounding the main building of UA when she'd run into Bakugu. The girl's water manipulation power was usually very useful in fights, but Bakugu hadn't found it nearly as impressive as the faculty who'd accepted her 2 weeks in. I started it? Hello, retard, anyone home? You came at me first, yelled Bakugu. I was greeting you. You dumped ice water on me. After you tried to blast my head off, I was training, and I can't work when I'm freaking cold. Well, so why my quirk isn't called jacuzzi. Children, enough, exclaimed Recovery Girl. This kind of insubordinate squabbling is too petty for heroes in training. He started it. She started it. I don't care who started it, replied Shigenzi. I'll finish it. As she wrapped a burn on Lacey's leg, the aged hero glared at both children to let them know she was not kidding. Bakugo huffed and turned away, as was his nature. Recovery Girl was used to that. What she was not used to, however, was Lacey's response. The girl brushed her blue and orange hair aside, and glanced over at Bakugo. I'm sorry, she murmured. It was immature of me to assume you wanted to train with me. I'll make sure to ask next time. Her Japanese was slightly broken, as was usually the case with transfers, except Jackson, but she got her point across well. Yeah, you better, snarled Bakugo, but with less conviction than before. Anyone looking closely at him would see a tinge of red on his face. He was about as used to Lacey's sudden mood shift as Shigenzi was. The Recovery Girl smiled at Lacey. If what I'm hearing from the both of you is true, then yes, you acted immaturely in the moment. But right now, what you just said, even I don't act that mature all the time. She looked sternly at Bakugo. You could take some notes from Lacey here, young man. Whatever. Look, I didn't come to the UA to learn how to make friends, Bakugo snapped. So back OFF, and let me live my life how I see fit. A sigh escaped Recovery Girl's lips before she could stop it. See to it he doesn't kill you before I come back, she said to Lacey, before leaving the room to see another patient. Lacey turned to Bakugo again. Are you okay? Do I look like I'm freaking okay? Oh, sorry. She tried a new tactic now. So why did you come to the UA for? What does it look like to become a professional hero? Yes, I understand that. I did the same thing. Then I don't see the problem. I'm just trying to make conversation. We won't be leaving for a while. So painful as it may be, we'd better start to get to know each other. Lacey's hair fell over her eye again, but she made no move to push it away. I already apologized to you. Let's start fresh, okay? Whatever, Bakugo snapped. He let out an irritated sigh. I want to be a hero because, well, look at All Might. He's got everything. He's the most powerful man alive. He's famous. He has the world in the palm of his hand. And if he can get it, he clenched a fist, smiling darkly. So can I. Cool, Lacey smiled, running a hand through her hair. I'm here because I got kicked out of my last school. Kicked out? What the frick did you do? Asked Bakugo. Now he was interested. Control the kid's blood. I was about to give him a heart attack. Seriously? You control water and blood? Well, yes, I can manipulate blood, but that takes a lot of concentration, and really dehydrates me. I usually stick to pure water. Makes life easier. That sucks. You're wasting your talent. If I had your power, I'd be blood-bathing people left and right. Katsuki, is that your name? You've got a choice here. Lacey's demeanor switched on a dime, and her eyes darkened. Her smile never left her face. You've either got a strong friend in me, or a horrible enemy. Which is it, Bakuboy? She reached forward, and wrapped a hand around Bakuga's arm. Bakuga felt a tight pull on his chest that seemed to come from every area of his body. His eyes widened in realization of just what this pull was. And for the first time in his life, the Blast Zone hero was afraid. Wisp's hair flared back to an electric life immediately after Ishido's slap. He shook his head, and sat up, panting. Whoa, what happened? Is she gone? He asked. Suddenly, his hair sparked down, and he reverted to his base form. Jackson rubbed his cheek, and glanced at Ishido. You slapped him. It wasn't a question, but a statement. And a funny one, judging from the grin on the TC user's face. It was Aoyama's idea, exclaimed the pink girl, covering her face with her hands. Monsheri, I had nothing to do with it, replied Aoyama, glancing over at Tokoemi, who only shrugged. When you weren't waking up, murmured the bird, Ishido tried slapping you to force you to regain consciousness. It clearly didn't work, so Aoyama suggested that she rub her hands together to make static, and try again. He looked down, as if embarrassed to have said even that much. Well, thanks, all of you. Jackson smiled, getting up and stretching. He brushed his hair out of his eyes and looked over at Todoroki. Another time, man? Agreed. Todoroki turned and began to walk away. Cementos followed, muttering under his breath. Aoyama used his laser to blast away and look for another opponent, leaving only Tokoemi and Ishido standing with Jackson. Ishido put a hand on Jackson's shoulder. Are you sure you're alright? She asked. You used a lot of power. Yeah, I'm fine. Even my headache isn't too bad right now. Might have been the sleep. I don't get too much sometimes. Headache and all. The brunette yawned, and for the first time Ishido and Tokoemi saw a set of 3 scars bisecting his right eye. Dark shadow popped out of Tokoemi, using one shadow hand to brush against the scars. Where did you get these? It asked, tilting its head. Tokoemi tried to call back the shade, but Jackson laughed. My friend Chada used to own a cat, and it hated me with a passion. One time, his family went to Austria for a month, and my mom house sat. Of course, the one time I went in, the sucker was basically sitting right inside the door, and BAP, he feigned striking himself in the eye. I was ambushed. How are you so calm? Asked Ishido. You literally just got ambushed again, by a girl with a really powerful quirk. How do you know she won't try to attack you again? First of all, emotional extremes are the area of my other form's expertise. I'm calm simply because I don't know how to be anything else. Second, I've learned her pattern. She'll only come after me if she knows there won't be anyone else around, and she usually stays away from places she's already tried. It's so weird, Ishido shuddered. First the League of Villains, then this. It's like we're a homing beacon to villainy. She shook her head, beginning to walk away. It's too much to process on an empty stomach. I'm going to get some lunch. I'll be leaving too, added Tokoemi. He glanced at Jackson. It might be wise if you come along, as well. All right. Jackson nodded, and walked behind Ishido. He let his hair fall back over his face as he walked, and when Tokoemi split off at the cafeteria, and Ishido ran over to her friends, the boy found himself alone. He glanced around, his breath quickening slightly, and got into the lunch line to order. Ishido sat down next to Jiro, her lunch in her bag. She decided not to bring up Tanya's attack. What's up? She asked, directed at everyone at the table. Actually, I have a question for you, replied Yaoyorozu, her eyes boring straight into Ishido's. What do you think of Americans? Jackson? He's nice, really observant. Quiet though. Why are you not a fan? You could say that. He seems aloof, distant, like he doesn't know about us, and doesn't care. Yaoyorozu shook her head. And he always looks like he's bored out of his mind. Personally, I think he's got problems. I'll say one thing for him, murmured Jiro, taking a sip of her Mountain Dew. His eyes are beyond gorgeous. It looks like you're staring into a pool filled with lightning. Do me a favor, and don't ever say that to his face, replied Uraraka, drawing a laugh from the whole table, even Momo. And I agree with Ishido. He's not aloof. He's just got a really bad headache because of his quirk. Speaking of his quirk, Sue murmured. Did he turn into another form at the Battle City? He was the electric one Wisp. That's a dash. And then he changed back to himself toward the end, replied Ishido. Did he change? What, like his clothes? How should I know? No, his appearance. Actually, yeah, he did. His eyes turned green. So did his hair. She cocked her head. Why do you need to know? I ribbit. I was just wondering. He turned into his fire form at the USJ, and he looked pretty different. I wanted to know if he always did that. Dude, they're talking about you over there, said Cyril. While Jackson had just gotten his takoyaki, and sat down next to Ojiro. You sure? He asked. Yep. Yaoyorozu said something about the American, Cyril replied, grinning. Guess they can't get enough of a new thing. I think you need to get a hearing aid, Jackson replied, stuffing a bite of octopus into his mouth. He pretended to have another headache surge, putting a hand over his face to hide the blush that was crossing it. No way are they talking about me. Half of them haven't even talked home. I don't know, Ojiro murmured teasingly. You've caused quite a stir here these last 2 days. He chuckled. Maybe they've all grown obsessed with you. No, I don't think that's it. Jackson sighed. Look, when a girl talks about me, and I'm not around, it's rarely good. I've had it happen a lot. He shook his head. Not a good situation. Zero sensed that this was a sore spot for the TC hero. So, he exclaimed, changing the subject, I've been thinking. We're all in the hero course. What are our names going to be when we become full-fledged? I don't know about you, but I'm gonna stay in Mashireo long after high school, replied Ojiro, grinning savagely, leaning back in his chair. Shut up. You know what I mean. I was thinking about cellophane. Hold it right there. Jackson glanced over at Zero, his gaze serious. You're the tape hero, right? What kind of name is cellophane? I've got a better one for you, he said. He pulled out his phone, and began typing into it, pulling up a video, and showing it to Zero. An American commercial. A man was yelling about his new brand of tape. He suddenly pulled out a chainsaw, and sawed a bucket in half, yelling manically, then proceeded to fix the bucket with his tape. The video was hilarious, but, as far as the inspiration, Zero was unimpressed. And I'm supposed to get a name out of this? Jackson grinned. Look at the title, he replied. Zero glanced at the phone, and the name suddenly came to him. He and Jackson said it at the same time, Flex. Thanks for watching my video, and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic. Link is in the description. See you next time, till then sayonara.